Hello, I'm Rachel Crick, and you're listening to Be the Change. I'm standing on the corner of Main Street and Broadway in the heart of downtown Lexington. It's a chilly December evening, and I'm staring at one of the biggest Christmas trees I've ever seen, located just outside of Triangle Park. On my right is Urban Outfitters, and across the street to my left is Starbucks. There's people everywhere and lots of cars going by. They're walking with their holiday cups, or they're headed to the ice skating ring in Triangle Park, or maybe doing some Christmas shopping. Downtown in December is really a sight. All the street lamps and trees are decorated with strings of lights and garland and bows. It's a really great way to celebrate the season of giving. Speaking of giving, also in Lexington's cheery, festive streets, there are signs posted every couple of blocks. They say, "Change the way you give." When I first saw them, I knew what they were referring to instantly. Lexington has what has been labeled a panhandling problem. Let me tell you why this problem caught my eye. Earlier this year, I was eating at Vinaigrette in Victorian Square with my mom and a family friend. While we were eating, a man came up to our table and began to ask us for money. The family friend told him no, but he didn't just tell him no, he almost yelled it. His tone was aggressive and sharp. The man flinched away and left the building. Not even 5 minutes later, a small, older woman came up to us and began to ask us the same thing. He said the exact same thing to her, a firm no. She mumbled something like, "God bless you," and left. I watched her as she left, and my heart sank. I was really shocked by that friend's tone. He's a nice, generous man who I've known almost all my life, so the fact that he could talk to anyone like that really surprised me. But as much as that shocked me, I realized my own reactions and behavior weren't really all that better. I may not have been so direct, but I would ignore beggars, cross to the other side of the street. When I pass them at an intersection, I avoid eye contact. So is treating them like they don't exist better than being curt with them? I don't think so. I started to think about the way we view the less fortunate and how our society treats them, and how we got to this point in the first place. How did we get to the point where we are apathetic, where we regard them with suspicion and contempt, where we think that they did this to themselves? Why do people like me, who feel pity and want to help, simply push them out of our minds and just continue on about our lives? When did we stop seeing them as people? I'm not an expert on the topic, not a sociologist or a social worker, but one thing I do know is that Lexington is very divided on this subject. The emotions attached to this controversial issue range from sympathy and pity to fear and downright anger and hatred. This is evident online. The Herald-Leader, Lexington's leading newspaper, has been covering the city's campaign to end panhandling, which is responsible for the signs around downtown. One article discusses a public Facebook page where Lexington citizens post pictures of panhandlers and publicly shame them. While a spokesperson has stated that this is not reflective of Lexington's true feelings towards panhandlers, it's clear it represents the feelings of a lot of different people. To answer this complicated question, I first wanted to interview that same family friend about the incident earlier this year. I was a little nervous going into the interview because I didn't want him to think that I thought badly of him. Rather, because I think he's a good person, I was just confused by his actions. When I asked him if he remembered the incident, it was very clear he did.
That particular day, I believe, there was a big tournament in town. And on my way to meet you all at the restaurant, that day, I think there was probably 3 or 4 people that had asked me just to the restaurant. So you only saw incident
The
number
latter.
5.
Yeah, okay.
And number 6, not 1, 2, 3 and 4.
Okay.
And that was I know exactly the day you're talking about.
That makes more sense, that I was not seeing his typical response, but his response when he was sort of at the end of his rope. I can relate. It's like when you're at the mall walking by kiosks and every single one of them asks you to try their product. The first time it's a polite no, but by the end of the long line you might be aggravated and curt with them. He continued to tell me about his past experiences with panhandling.
There has gotten to be a real influx of it in the last 3 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
You used to not see it very often, and if you did, I was much more apt to actually give money.
So for him, it's personal experience with panhandling, and a lot of it. He says he works downtown and sees it over and over again from the same people. When I asked him about the campaign to end panhandling and what he thought the motivations behind that were, here's what he said.
I'm sure there is a segment of society that likes that just because it's like, okay, now you can't beg, you got to work.
Mm-hmm.
And there's part of me that's like, okay, yeah, I agree with that. But again,
Mm-hmm.
there's also a big part of me that understands why a lot of people are doing this.
Yeah. A Johns Hopkins University study indicates that the more one is panhandled, the more likely they are to view poverty as a function of personal choice, and to be less sympathetic towards them in general. This makes sense. Overexposure could definitely lead to apathy, even the most sad things. If you see it all the time, you're going to get used to it. If you have to keep telling them no, you're going to get tired of it. I asked someone else what their thoughts on panhandlers were, my friend and longtime Lexington resident, Erin. I asked her what her typical response was to panhandlers.
I really don't carry cash, so I kind of feel bad because I'm like, I really don't have anything.
Alright, what about...
When I'm driving by them, I like sing in the car, so I always stop because I'm like, don't look happy at when they're miserable. Like,
I asked her if she could think of anything that affected her response and feelings towards them. She said 2 things, her gender and her generation. The gender one was obvious, to me at least. Most panhandlers I see are men, and that is something that makes me wary of them automatically, because as Erin put it, they're bigger and stronger, and it's pretty rational to put a little distance between you and someone who's intimidating to you. I feel the same way. But I found her point on the generational differences very interesting.
I think a lot of it, or like in my experience, it's usually like parents and grandparents in those generations who have less sympathy for panhandlers. Because like people that I know, they're like kind of like my peers or whatever. They're like they're like make them nervous, but like for the most part, they like sympathize with them. I think that kind of comes down to like how more millennials are like favor like socialized medicine and stuff like that, and like parents and grandparents in those generations don't, because I think like those generations too have sort of this like every man for themselves mentality, and which I think is kind of changing.
I connected this to a shift in American culture, which I read about in an article in the Journal of Social Distress and the Homeless. It discussed the change that occurred during the 1980s, when we as a nation sort of turned on the homeless and started to view them with suspicion and contempt. Public figures and politicians, including the president at the time, Ronald Reagan, started to paint them in a negative light. I think a portrayal of this negativity in Lexington can be seen in the Facebook page I mentioned earlier. As with all cyberbullying, it gets taken a little too far, with some being critical of their appearance and some comments even implicating violence. I wonder if I sought out the ages of those posting these things if I would notice a trend. Generational ideals could very well be influencing how we view the homeless and how we interact with them. It interests me to think about how, given this particular sphere of influence, whether or not that's going to change back soon. With more millennials voting and even running for office and just having more influence in American political life in general, I wonder if policy concerning the homeless and panhandlers will change. Something else to consider about this particular issue is whether or not the policy in place now is actually beneficial for panhandlers and the homeless. Lexington's campaign to end panhandling has been an uphill battle, which has been dutifully documented by the Herald Leader. One article from the academic journal Political Behavior argues laws like this are motivated by the public's desire for distance between themselves and the homeless on account of the emotion of disgust. Like so many of our emotions, disgust plays an important role in our survival by helping us avoid illness and danger, but it may tie in with our general discomfort and anxiety surrounding the less fortunate. However, laws like this may be counterproductive and prolong one's homelessness. This is because if you arrest someone for begging for money or for sleeping in public or fine them, they have a criminal history and will have more difficulty finding a job. I find this argument very interesting. I asked another college student and native Lexingtonian what her thoughts on this campaign were.
I think our mayor is a good guy, so I don't think he's gonna, deliberately put his citizens in harm's way. But I do know, like, the people around here, and I have heard, like, negative comments about homeless people. I don't think it's deliberate, because I think most of the people, do care and want to see people get better. But it's kind of hard to do. Like, if you go to Starbucks, you'll see sometimes a homeless man just hanging out there, and it's like, oh, hey. You, like, acknowledge it, but not really.
You acknowledge it without really absorbing it.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, hey, and then you just go about your day.
I do believe, as both women put it, that most decent people really are trying to help the homeless, but our desire for distance from them may be hurting them even more. So the answer to my question is this. People treat panhandlers the way they do because of their exposure to them and because of qualities about them, such as their gender, their age, or their culture. But above all, the one thing that seems to fit into any circumstance is that we are uncomfortable because of them. We may feel pity, guilt, helplessness, or disgust in their presence. Or we may be unsure about their mental stability and want to protect our own safety. All of these responses are rational and perfectly normal. However, I don't want to argue that just because something is commonplace in society means that it's good. On the contrary, I think a change is in order, and not necessarily where you might think. You see, I'm not arguing that you should give more money to them, and I'm not debating on whether or not they actually need it. I'm advocating for a reassessment of how we view them as a whole, and this may affect how we treat them in turn. I want them to be seen as human, as worthy of respect. I want them to be given the same benefit of the doubt that we give any other person we pass on the streets. My interviewees sum it up well.
It makes me want to do more than just give $1 out the window.
Okay.
Yeah, some sort of social change
Yeah.
has to happen. And most people, I don't know, I can't say that. I think a lot of people view these as just anonymous sort of beings.
That are just existing.
But, you think about everybody, and, this woman's probably in her 40s, that guy's probably in his 50s, and, what's their life story? They got a life story just like you got one, and I.
So I think I'd like to look into more ways to, like, help the less fortunate.
Yeah.
And also I don't have a lot of money because college is a thing.
I don't think any one person feels like they can make a big difference, and I think as a whole we need to make a collective effort to make a difference.
So I too am reassessing my behavior and beliefs and looking into ways to help the less fortunate. This is a problem that likely won't go away on its own. Making it illegal to panhandle or sleep in public or just ignoring them doesn't solve poverty. Solutions like the End Panhandling van are a good start, but until we've solved this problem altogether, let's just take a step back and try to remember to treat one another civilly. Thank you.